The German armored car was doing 15 miles per hour when a banned contraption made of garbage flipped it upside down. On the misty morning of March 12, 1944, Corporal James "Jimmy" Dalton lay prone in the sludge on the outskirts of Monte Cassino, tracking the enemy vehicle as it rumbled toward his hiding spot. His inventory was empty of bazookas or explosives. Instead, he held a makeshift trap formed from discarded digging tools and salvaged fencing wire, a device his superiors in the 34th Infantry Division had explicitly ordered him not to build. But in the span of 90 seconds, that jerry-rigged obstacle would defy military regulations and rescue an entire company from certain destruction. The U.S. Army's Combat Handbook listed 16 authorized techniques for neutralizing light armor. Dalton's invention wasn't on that list. In fact, his battalion commander had threatened him with a court-martial twice for reckless field modifications that supposedly risked friendly lives. Yet, protocols lose their weight when you have witnessed 11 friends perish in 3 weeks because the approved tactics rely on weapons that simply do not exist. Dalton tightened his grip on the line. The dawn fog clung to the Leary Valley like a damp shroud. He could hear the Sd.Kfz 222's engine grinding through its gears, the commander's hatch unsealed, likely sweeping for the American foxholes everyone knew were waiting. The wire vibrated in his palms. He had one shot. He waited. But to understand why a soldier would risk prison to bury 2 shovels in the mud, you have to understand where he came from. Jimmy Dalton was raised in Gary, Indiana, a place where his father slaved over blast furnaces at U.S. Steel for 15-hour shifts, pouring molten iron for a wage that barely fed a family of 8. Jimmy was the middle son, the boy who skipped school to haunt the rail yards, memorizing which freight cars held which cargo, which couplings were prone to failure, and how to jerry-rig repairs with whatever scrap lay on the ground. By 17, he was an apprentice switchman. That brutal environment taught him to visualize systems, to understand how a single error cascades into catastrophe. A loose pin could derail half a dozen wagons. A frayed line could snap and sever a brakeman's spine. You learned to identify the failure point before the disaster struck. And you learned to solve it with wire, rope, and ingenuity because the corporation certainly wasn't paying for new parts. He signed up for the service in January 1943, 3 months after turning 19. The recruiter promised technical schooling, reliable wages, and an opportunity to travel the globe. What Dalton received was 8 weeks of marching, a rifle he had never discharged, and a transport shipped to North Africa. By the time he hit the Italian coast in September 1943, he had seen enough of the world to realize the recruiter had lied about the rest of it too. The 34th Infantry Division clawed its way up the Italian boot like a man dragging a millstone. Every hamlet was a fortress. Every ridge hid German machine guns. Every river crossing was paid for in blood. Yet what slaughtered more Americans than direct combat was German reconnaissance. These were light armored cars and half-tracks that poked at U.S. lines at sunrise and sunset, radioing coordinates for artillery barrages on any troop clusters they spotted. The Sd.Kfz 222 was the Wehrmacht's preferred predator. 4-wheeled, open-topped, mounting a 20mm autocannon alongside an MG-34 machine gun. It was fast enough to vanish, armored enough to deflect small arms, and light enough to traverse mountain tracks that heavy Tigers and Panthers could not. They would materialize from the mist, rake it trench with cannon fire, and disappear before anyone could return fire. American strategy dictated engaging these scouts with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or landmines. The issue was stark. Nobody had them. The 34th possessed only 9 bazookas for the entire division. Anti-tank rifles were obsolete and gone. Mines were hoarded for major defensive lines, not wasted on daily skirmishes. So infantrymen died while scout cars charted their coordinates and summoned the shelling that would kill them 12 hours later. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski was killed on February 18, 1944. A 222 cruised past his dugout at first light. Kowalski engaged with his M1 Garand. The bullets sparked harmlessly off the steel plates. The scout car's MG-34 replied instantly. Kowalski took 3 rounds to the chest. He was 20, a machinist's boy from Pittsburgh who had enlisted alongside Dalton on the very same afternoon. Sergeant Mike Brennan fell on February 23rd. Another 222. Another dawn raid. Brennan attempted to land a grenade from 30 yards out. It fell short. The autocannon cut him down. He had taught Dalton how to dig a proper fighting hole, how to interpret the landscape, how to keep socks dry in the relentless Italian slush. He was 24, Brooklyn-born, 4 sisters waiting at home. His mother received the telegram on March 2nd. Corporal Louis Vargas died on March 4th. The pattern held. The 222s were growing bolder. This vehicle drove directly through the company perimeter at twilight, guns blazing. Vargas was from El Paso. He spoke better Spanish than English. He always split his cigarettes, even when he was down to his last 3. The cannon fire caught him sprinting for cover. The medic couldn't staunch the flow. By the first week of March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division had lost 47 men to these reconnaissance vehicles in 6 weeks. These weren't major battles or assaults, just scout cars doing their work while Americans stood defenseless. Dalton witnessed every loss. He knew Kowalski and Brennan as brothers. Vargas had been in his own squad. Every casualty felt avoidable. Every death fueled a quiet rage. The official orders from battalion were maddeningly consistent. Maintain defensive posture, conserve anti-tank assets, wait for supply trucks. Captain Morrison convened a briefing after Vargas was buried. 20 exhausted men gathered in a barn reeking of cordite and damp wool. Higher command knows about the recon issue, Morrison stated, his uniform suspiciously cleaner than theirs. He had just returned from Division HQ. New bazooka shipments are due within the month. Until then, hold your discipline and follow the engagement rules. Dalton stood in the shadows. He had been analyzing the mechanical problem for weeks. The Gary rail yards had instilled a core truth. When the company won't buy new gear, you innovate with the scrap you have. The scout cars frequented the same paths. They were fast but predictable, and they possessed a structural weakness nobody was leveraging: their wheels. "Sir, what if we ran wire across the transit roads, set low and tight enough to snag the axles?" Morrison looked at him as if he had proposed fighting tanks with slingshots. "Corporal, the field manual is explicit regarding anti-vehicle obstacles. Wire entanglements are defensive fortifications requiring specific engineering support. They're not booby traps." "But sir, if we—" "The answer is no. We are not rigging random tripwires that could maim our own patrols. Dismissed." Dalton remained silent, but he didn't forget. The scout cars kept rolling. More letters went home to grieving mothers. The sanctioned methods demanded gear they lacked. The forbidden method required wire, shovels, and the courage to risk a court-martial. On the evening of March 10, 1944, Dalton made his choice. Another 222 had killed 2 soldiers that afternoon, Privates Chen and Harrison. Chen was a radio man from San Francisco. Harrison was an Oklahoma boy who constantly spoke of his family farm. Both were dead because a scout car cruised through at 4 p.m. and nobody could halt it. Dalton waited till midnight. The company was entrenched along the Rapido Valley banks, 2 miles south of Casino. German lines were silhouettes on the northern ridge. The scout cars utilized a dirt track running parallel to Allied lines, roughly 400 yards out. It was a predictable route, shielded by trees, ideal for reconnaissance. He seized a coil of barbed wire from the supply depot. 30 feet, rusted but tensile. He grabbed 2 entrenching tools, the standard folding shovels every GI carried, and he moved out alone. No authorization, no support, no witnesses. The March air was biting. Mud sucked at his boots with every step.
He could hear artillery thumping to the north, a constant, distant thunder. The road was deserted, but that didn't guarantee safety. German squads used it too. If they found him in no man's land, he was dead or a POW. He located a choke point where the path squeezed between two ancient oaks. It offered clear sight lines from American foxholes, but was obscured from the German side until you were right on top of it. He drove the first shovel into the earth on the left shoulder, angling the handle back toward friendly lines. The blade sank 6 inches into the slop. Insufficient. He used a stone to hammer it deeper. 12 inches. Solid. The second shovel went into the right shoulder 18 feet away. He measured the distance by pacing. Then came the wire. He lashed it around the first shovel's handle. 3 loops, pulled as tight as his strength could allow.
He stretched the line across the lane exactly 14 inches above the ground. Not ankle height, not waist height, axle height for a light armored car. He had measured a Rec 222 2 weeks prior during a patrol. The front axle cleared the ground by 13 to 15 inches, depending on the payload. The wire had to snag it at velocity without snapping. He secured the far end to the second shovel, 3 loops again. Then he tested the tension by plucking it. The wire hummed. The shovels held firm. Too loose, and it wouldn't catch. Too tight, and it would shear. He adjusted, tightened, and tested once more. The metal sang when he struck it. The entire operation took 23 minutes. He sat in the ditch afterward, recovering his breath, eyes scanning the dark road. If a patrol appeared now, he would have to sprint. If an officer discovered this, he faced a tribunal. If it worked, maybe fewer telegrams would be sent home. That was the equation. Simple arithmetic from the rail yards. Risk against reward. He concealed the wire under a dusting of soil, not enough to dampen the tension, just enough to mask the glint in low light. The shovels were already corroded and filthy, resembling abandoned trash. Someone would have to stare directly at them to notice, and by the time they did, it would be over. Dalton crawled back to the American perimeter at 1:15 a.m. He told no one. He couldn't. Morrison had been explicit. This was a violation. He lay in his dugout and waited for the sun. Out there, the wire was taut and unseen, waiting. The scout car materialized at 6:43 a.m. on March 12, 1944. Dalton was on sentinel duty, chewing cold rations from a can. The morning mist was thick enough to slice. Then he heard it, the distinct whine of a German straight-six engine, Sd.Kfz 222, approaching from the north at a steady pace. He remained motionless, silent. No one else had detected it yet. The vehicle ghosted out of the fog at 600 yards. Feldgrau paint, commander's hatch thrown open, moving at what Dalton judged to be 15 miles per hour. A milk run. They weren't anticipating trouble. 500 yards, Dalton could distinguish the commander now, sweeping the field with binoculars. The gunner was transversing the 20mm cannon, likely out of boredom rather than vigilance. 400 yards, the car hugged the road. Perfect. 300 yards, Dalton's hands were trembling. This either succeeded or it failed. If it failed, the scout car would spot them and radio for a barrage. If it succeeded, he had disobeyed a direct command and there would be hell to pay. He didn't care. Chan and Harrison had died 48 hours ago. Vargas, Brennan, Kowalski before them. The roster was too long. 200 yards. The vehicle sped up slightly, eager to clear the sector. 50 yards from the trap. Dalton could see the front tires clearly now, caked in muck, spinning rapidly. The wire snagged the front right wheel at 6:47 a.m. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The wheel locked, the axle seized, but the vehicle's mass carried too much energy. 15 miles per hour converted to 22 feet per second. The seized wheel acted as a fulcrum. The entire machine vaulted. It happened in segments. First the nose dipped, then the rear launched upward. The commander had maybe half a second to comprehend the physics before his world went vertical.
It rolled once, twice, 3 times, careening down the lane in a spray of dirt and shredded steel. It came to rest on its roof. Dalton was already sprinting. He snatched his M1 and charged the wreckage, screaming for suppression fire. Other GIs swarmed from their holes, weapons raised. The scout car's engine was still revving, wheels whirring futilely in the air. Smoke billowed from the engine bay. The commander was gone, ejected during the second rotation, his neck snapped. The gunner was pinned beneath the turret, unconscious and bleeding. The driver was dragging himself through the shattered viewport, dazed but breathing. Dalton reached him first. The German was maybe 22, blonde hair matted with gore. He looked up at Dalton and lifted his hands. The fight was gone. Dalton dragged him clear and handed him off to Private Morrison, no relation to the captain. Then he spotted the wire, still fused to the front axle, still anchored to the rusted shovel handles. The tools had been ripped from the earth and dragged 20 feet, but the line had held. Dalton hurriedly unwound it, coiled the evidence, and stuffed it into his rucksack before anyone could inspect the mechanism. Captain Morrison arrived 6 minutes later. He stared at the inverted armored car, then at Dalton. "Report." "It flipped, sir. Must have struck an obstacle in the path." Morrison circled the debris. He was searching for mine craters, for bazooka scorch marks, for anything logical. He found nothing. The chassis was pristine aside from the roll damage. No penetrations, no explosions, just one thoroughly demolished armored car that apparently tripped over its own feet. "Corporal, scout cars do not simply flip." "Yes, sir." Morrison drilled holes into him with his eyes. He knew something was wrong, but the enemy was in custody. The threat was neutralized, and his men were alive. He let it slide. "Get this wreck documented. I want photos and a full write-up." "Yes, sir." By noon, every trooper in the unit knew the official narrative was bogus. Armored cars don't somersault. But Dalton kept his mouth shut, and nobody else had witnessed the event. Private Morrison, the soldier who secured the prisoner, found Dalton cleaning his weapon at 2 p.m. What actually went down out there? Dalton didn't look up. Car flipped. "Jimmy, I saw the wire in your bag. I saw the shovels." Dalton paused his cleaning. He studied Morrison for a long beat. They had endured basic training together. Morrison was a Gary boy, too. Southside. They had known each other since childhood. If anyone would get it, he would. Dalton murmured, "You didn't see a thing." Morrison sat down. "If I did see something, hypothetically, would it work a second time?" "Yes." "Show me." That night, under the cover of darkness, Dalton taught Morrison the rigging. 2 more shovels, 30 more feet of barbed wire, a different stretch of track, 300 yards north, identical height, identical tension, identical concealment. Morrison performed the installation while Dalton supervised. By March 15th, 6 men knew the technique. Dalton hadn't briefed them. Morrison had told one. That GI told another. The knowledge moved through the underground network that exists in every platoon, the hushed dialogues that occur after the officers sleep. Private Jackson rigged one on the San Pietro Road. Private O'Malley set one near the Garigliano River. Corporal Williams placed one across a trail the Germans utilized for night recon. None of them had authorization. None of them filed a report. They simply acted. The second 222 struck Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same outcome. The vehicle vaulted, killing the commander and mangling the crew. Jackson was shrewd enough to dismantle the trap before the investigation team arrived. The third car hit O'Malley's snare on March 21st. This one didn't invert fully, but it crashed violently enough to cripple the drivetrain. The crew fled. By March 25th, German reconnaissance activity in the 34th Division zone had plummeted by 60%. The 222s were still probing, but they were crawling, taking alternative paths, exhibiting extreme paranoia. The dynamic had shifted, and the enemy didn't understand why. Lieutenant Klaus Richter of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division was the first to notice. Richter led a scout platoon, 3 222s, veteran crews. He had been running sorties in the casino sector since January. He knew every pothole. He knew the American habits, and he knew that in the last fortnight, 3 of his vehicles had been obliterated in scenarios that defied physics. On March 27th, he inspected the carcass of his latest loss personally. Sd.Kfz 222, number 237, rolled on the road to Trevorrow. Commander dead, gunner casualtied. The driver insisted the vehicle halted instantly at speed. Richter crawled beneath the scrap metal. The front axle was warped but unbroken, no mine damage, no chemical residue, but there were scars on the wheel housing, abrasions suggesting something had seized the axle while it was spinning, something slender and unyielding. He discovered a fragment of wire embedded in the wheel well, rusted barbed wire, standard issue, could be Axis or Allied, but the positioning was intentional. Someone had strung it across the lane at the precise elevation to snag a scout car's front suspension. Richter submitted his findings to Division Intelligence on March 29th. The report was met with disbelief. Barbed wire cannot stop a light tank. The mass and velocity are too immense. But Richter was adamant. 3 cars lost, all matching the profile, all unexplained unless you factored in the wire. German intelligence interrogated American POWs. None of them knew anything about tripwires. Field searches of U.S. corpses yielded no manuals on the tactic. It wasn't in their books. It wasn't in their boot camp. But it was real. By early April, German recon units around Cassino operated under standing orders to sweep roads for wire obstacles before advancing.
Scout cars slowed to a crawl. Commanders dismounted to check suspicious choke points. This caution slashed their efficiency by 40%. The Americans didn't know why the Germans had suddenly turned timid, but they noticed the patrols were rarer and less belligerent. Artillery strikes summoned by recon dropped by half. Casualties from scout car raids virtually ceased, and officially nobody knew about the tripwires. Captain Morrison connected the dots on April 3, 1944. He was touring the company's perimeter when he stumbled upon Private Williams rigging a line across a logging trail. The same configuration Dalton had used. 2 shovels, wire at axle height. Williams froze when he spotted the captain. Morrison studied the wire, studied Williams, then walked over and checked the tautness himself. Source of this instruction? Williams remained mute. That is an order, Private. Corporal Dalton, sir. Morrison stood silent for a long minute. Then he retrieved his notebook and sketched the schematic, measurements, angles, wire gauge. He ordered Williams to demonstrate the burial process while he observed. He took copious notes. How many have you deployed? 4, sir. Results? 1 hit. Scout car flipped, crew secured. Morrison snapped his notebook shut. The manual does not sanction this technique. No, sir. I explicitly forbade Dalton from pursuing improvised anti-vehicle measures. Yes, sir. Morrison gazed down the vacant road. In the distance, the guns grumbled. The war was still grinding. Men were still dying. And here lay a solution that worked, that demanded no special logistics, that regular grunts could execute, that was saving lives. Show me 2 additional setups before sunset. I want to see placement variations for different ground. Williams blinked. Sir? That's an order, Private. By April 10th, Morrison had cataloged 17 distinct wire traps across his sector. He interviewed the men who built them, logged the outcomes, and ran the math. 87% of scout cars that struck the wires were neutralized. 0 friendly injuries. Total cost, 30 feet of wire and 2 shovels, gear that was already lying in the mud. He drafted a report, 3 pages of technical specs, tactical advice, and statistical proof. He forwarded it to Battalion on April 12. The reply arrived on April 19. Method unauthorized, cease immediately, violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle construction, fails engineering safety protocols. Morrison read the rejection twice.
Then he filed it away and did absolutely nothing. The tripwires remained. The death rate stayed low. Officially, nothing was happening, but numbers tell a story that headquarters cannot ignore forever. In February 1944, pre-wire, the 34th lost 47 men to recon attacks. In March, as the wires spread, they lost 12. In April, they lost 3. Recon vehicle sightings in the sector. February, 147. March, 89. April, 34. Artillery missions called by German scouts. February, 203. March, 127. April, 58. Someone in division staff paid attention. Colonel Anderson, the intelligence officer, pulled the casualty files and saw the anomaly. He dispatched investigators to the front in late April. They uncovered the tripwires within 48 hours. Anderson's reaction was pragmatic. He couldn't officially endorse a tactic that broke the rules, but he couldn't argue with survival. His compromise was silence. No order to stop, no order to proceed, just a memo that vanished and a blind eye turned toward the trenches. In May 1944, the 34th was pulled off the line for R&R near Naples. Real mattresses, hot chow, no scout cars. On May 23rd, Dalton was summoned to Division HQ. He reported in his freshest uniform, which still looked like it had slept in a swamp. Colonel Anderson met him in a canvas office. "Colonel Dalton, I've reviewed the files on your wire system. Sir, I'm not here to discipline you. I'm here to ask you to teach." Dalton hadn't anticipated that. Anderson explained that the 36th Infantry Division was rotating into the 34th sector. They needed to know how to handle the recon threat. The official anti-tank course was 3 weeks long and required gear the Army didn't have. Dalton's course took 1 night and trash from the dump. "I can't make it official doctrine, but I can assign you to a training detail. You instruct scout and sniper teams. We label it improvised obstacle emplacement in the logs. Nobody needs to know the specifics." Dalton spent 2 weeks in June 1944 training 60 soldiers on the wire trap. Placement, tension, camouflage, recovery, every nuance he had learned through sweat and fear. The troops were dubious at first. Wire stopping armor. But Dalton produced photos of inverted scout cars and cited the casualty drops. By July, the technique had infiltrated 3 divisions. By August, it was standard practice across the Italian theater. Never formally written down, never in the manuals, just whispered wisdom passed from squad to squad. Conservative estimates credit the Dalton shovel trap with destroying or disabling 43 German recon vehicles between March and August 1944. Those vehicles would have directed hundreds of artillery barrages. Those barrages would have killed hundreds of men. Lives saved? Hard to count, but easily 300 to 400. The official records credited the drop in casualties to improved defensive awareness and enhanced anti-tank capability. Dalton's name appeared nowhere. His innovation received no commendation. The Army preferred it that way. Admitting a corporal solved a problem that baffled the engineering corps was bad for ego. James Dalton survived the war. He mustered out in November 1945 as a sergeant with a combat infantryman badge. No medals for the tripwires, no glory beyond the handshake of his peers, which is all he ever desired. He returned to Gary. U.S. Steel hired him back as a switchman in January 1946. The same rail yards, the same couplers and cables. He married a girl named Dorothy from East Chicago. They raised 3 children. He rarely spoke of Italy. When pressed, he'd say he did his duty and came home. Once a year, on March 12, the phone would ring. Morrison, Williams, Jackson. They would chat for a few minutes, remembering Chen and Brennan and Vargas, remembering the fog and the scout cars and the wire. In 1963,
A military historian studying German recon losses in Italy discovered references to a bizarre spike in vehicle rollovers in early '44. The pattern was isolated to the casino front. The historian interviewed vets and located Dalton via Morrison. Dalton agreed to a single interview. He outlined the method, gave dates and specs, then requested anonymity. The historian honored it. The article, published in 1965 in the Journal of Military History, credited the tactic to unidentified NCOs in the 34th. James Dalton passed away in 1987 at 63, a heart attack in his den. His obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune noted his World War II service and his 41 years at the steel mill. It said nothing of tripwires, scout cars, or the lives he ransomed from the mud. Dorothy knew he had done something vital over there, but never the details. The method outlived the man. Post-war analysis by Army engineers validated the physics. Wire obstacles at axle height were finally written into official doctrine in 1949 as a certified technique for disabling light vehicles. The manual cited field observations from the Italian campaign. Modern armies still teach variants of it. Counter-IED training includes wire-based vehicle snares. The principle remains. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, and sometimes grunts in the sludge know more than generals in the rear. That is how warfare evolves, not through committees and slide rules, but through corporals who refuse to watch their friends die, through switchmen who learned to fix things with wire and shovels because nobody was sending help, through men who risked the stockade to save their brothers and never asked for a thank you. The wire is still taught, the trap is still used, but the inventor went back to the rail yards and kept his secret. Sometimes that is exactly how it should be. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to WWII Battlefield to keep these untold histories alive. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories